Hi, my name is Preston Krause, and welcome to my Nature of Materials final presentation. The goal of this project was to create an abstract sculpture of using the key concepts of highly influential pieces of modern architecture. The image you're seeing right now is the building that I chose for this project. This is Villa Maera, designed by Alvar Aalto in 1938. It's located in Normaku, Finland, and it functions as a residential home for his clients. When designing this home, the architect was only given one criteria to follow, and that was that his clients wanted it to be a retreat into nature, as they said. So Aalto was ultimately given full creative freedom when designing this home. Here I have some images of the exterior of the house. You can see in the image on the top left, this is the site plan, and it's a great representation of how the house is actually placed in the middle of a forest. This is very important because the only way to feel like you're retreating into nature is to actually be surrounded by nature itself. You'll also notice in the other images that there's a stark contrast between the white kind of boxy international style in modern architecture with the more natural wood and flowing forms that you can see in this image on the top right. These are actually incorporating the use of natural wood sourced locally to the site. Returning to this image on the top left, you will notice that the house is in an L shape, and this is intentional by the architect to create that separation between the kind of social aspect as you enter the house, blocking the natural aspect of the backyard. That's better seen in this picture in the bottom right. When looking at images of the interior of the house, the first thing you're kind of drawn to is the staircase. You'll notice that there are several irregularly placed wood columns that line the staircase. This is the architect's idea of creating the sense of nature being inside the building, and using these columns to represent the progression of trees as you walk through the woods and how they're irregularly placed and natural. You'll also see in this other image on the bottom right, this is the window that you can actually see in this first image too, that opens up to the backyard fully, and it creates this kind of limitless space of nature that the architect talks about a lot in his design, and that's very important for this project later on. So in order to start designing this sculpture, I needed to first identify the key concepts of Villa Maera. So the four that I came to were the limitless space of nature, the use of natural materials, organic contrast to modern lines, and a retreat into nature. Here are some images of my initial thoughts when designing this sculpture. You'll notice that there are two kind of main forms in this design. There's just a rectangular prism, and then kind of an organic shape that sits on top of it. The idea behind this design was that there would be two mirror panels on either end of this rectangular prism that would hold natural pieces of wood inside. And one of these mirrored panels would actually be a two-way mirror, with the other one being a regular mirror. So when you look through one end of it, it would give the illusion of, an infinite progression of trees. After receiving some feedback, however, a few issues kind of came up in our discussion. The first being that and the most important one being that the infinite tree angle is only really viewable from one side of this entire sculpture, and the idea is that this can be viewed, from 360 degrees. Also, the organic shape on top of it really wasn't doing anything, and it was just kind of sitting there, not to mention it would be very difficult to construct out of materials. After some redesigning, you can see some concepts stayed the same, being those wooden dowels representing the trees inside of a structure, but a lot of the exterior made a huge change. So these are images of my final small-scale model. You can see that I have now made these two L-shaped panels made out of white foam core, supposed to represent white wood, that are stacked on top of each other, with these wooden dowels representing the natural pieces of wood that kind of go through the middle and through that horizontal plane, to simulate that idea of the limitless space of nature. You'll also notice that on the inside of those wooden L-shaped panels, there is a piece of plexiglass placed there, and that represents the mirrors that I intended to place that reflect the wooden dowels inside, and you can kind of see that represented in these images. You'll notice in this image on the bottom left that there are two sheets of aluminum foil that are glued to the ends of these foam core, wooden panels. This is representing the use of metal in my design, and the idea behind these were to reflect the grass that this project would sit on, kind of giving it that natural look and more green look. And you'll also notice that these cantilevered ledges come out from that central tower and are held up by concrete columns. And the idea of that was just to represent the international style and the use of, long roof planes. After receiving some feedback on this design, I came to the conclusion that these cantilevered ledges actually needed to just get taken out altogether, as the international style was already represented using these L-shaped wood panels that were painted white. I also realized that I needed to take out these concrete pieces, as two concrete columns would be too heavy for the weight limit of this project of 150 pounds. Also, that the concrete could not actually be effectively poured in such a thin structure. So these were things that needed to be kind of rethought. Finally, here are the images of my final design fully constructed and placed in its presentation location. The first few things you'll notice is that the cantilevers are gone, and that I removed the horizontal that separated the two L-shaped wooden structures. This allowed the natural branches to extend throughout the entirety of the design, further incorporating that idea of the limitless space of nature. You'll also notice that the metal sheets have been removed from the bottom exterior walls and placed instead as the metal rod that goes through the middle. So first I'll touch on my use of wood in this final design. There are 4 24 by 24 inch plywood panels that I used and joined them at 90 degrees using just some basic metal screws. You'll also notice that these pieces of wood are painted white on either side, and this is to further represent that idea of the international style and that kind of boxy white form that's commonly seen. You'll also notice my other use of wood is these natural branches that extend through the height of this entire design, representing the natural aspect and how the architect incorporated the natural surroundings inside the actual house and outside of it as well. I want to mention the reason why these wood panels are joined at 90 degrees is to create this L shape that is also seen in the house itself. This makes it so one side of the structure is actually open and you can see the mirrors, while the other side is closed off and more private. This is a very important theme within Villa Maera, as the bottom floor is more of a social space, where the top floor is more private with many rooms. My use of metal in this design is simple yet effective. It's just a 1-inch diameter steel pole that's centered in the sculpture and just stuck into the ground. You'll notice that it's surrounded by the natural branches, and this is intentional, as it's meant to represent the house itself and how it sits in the middle of the forests in Finland. You'll notice that the pole itself is actually almost unnoticeable, and this is intentional, as it's supposed to almost blend into its surroundings as the house does. It sits there, it's not intrusive, but you can still see it, and it gets the point across. My use of concrete in this design is in the form of an 8-inch diameter cylindrical column that holds the cantilevered white L-shaped from the bottom. This column represents the foundations in which the architect who's finished himself used, and how he changed the international style to fit the Finnish value of nature. How he broke away from the rest of the world in incorporating natural aspects into a unnatural design. My use of glass in this design is one of the more important ones, and it's in the form of multiple 10 by 10 inch mirror panels. The original design of this was to have the entire piece of wood covered by one singular mirror panel, but after being quoted around $250 to get those cut out, I turned to Amazon and actually ordered these panels that pretty much do the same thing. So the idea is that they reflect the environment inside and outside of the structure itself. So when looking into it, you can get this sense of the limitless space of nature that the architect talks about when seeing the reflected tree branches. That, you know, it gives the sense of almost an infinite space within the design. You know, taking into account that this design is only 2 feet by 2 feet. So this has been my presentation for the Nature of Materials final project. Thanks for watching.